Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's like we're amazed. It's a wonderful full house. I hope it's not too tight. It's wonderful that this house is old and cool inside. And I want to thank especially Jackie Smalley, who's in the back, for hosting us and opening our beautiful room. Yeah, it's such a treat to be here. I also want to thank our wonderful event sponsors, underwriters, Paul and Ellen McCaskill, Bob and Terry Ryan, Claudine Torfs, Bernice Lindstrom, and Judy Workman, our board president. Thank you all so much for helping us. Extra special. And I really want to thank Flicka for being here. Flicka's been a supporter of the company for a couple of years, being very excited about what we're doing, but when I told her that we were doing Peleas and Melisande, the very first thing she says is, and I have a mezzo for you, and we've hired her, and I'm sure you and Jonathan will be talking about Kendra, who is amazing, and we can't wait to start working with her. No, not Kendra, Kendra Broom, who will be Melisande. And we'll be doing lots of things with Flicka surrounding Peleas and Melisande, which is an opera she happens to know very well. So what we thought we'd do today is do reverse order with the openings of our shows. The third opera we're going to present is called Quartet by Luca Francesconi, and Jeremy Wagner is the sound engineer on that show. Now, normally we would invite a singer or maybe the director to talk, but actually Jeremy is a huge, huge part of this production. It has a massive sound element to it, and Jeremy lives here in Berkeley and was a part of the American premiere of this opera in Spoleto, was it last year? Last year. So Jeremy is on... works for an organization called CNMAT.
CNMAT.
I'll let him explain it to you. But it's through the University of California, and they have a sound lab, and Jeremy invited some of us on the team producing Quartet to come and find out more about what this sound element was, because you really can't appreciate it unless you're there. It's not something you can understand from a recording. And it really, really blew our minds when Jeremy started taking us through the process and what the sound aspect of that is. So I asked if he would come and kind of explain it to you and maybe play a few excerpts to give you a sense of what that's going to be. So, sure. Jeremy, and then I'll maybe ask a few questions, and if you guys have questions also, we can do that.
Feel free. As Mark said, I'm Jeremy Wagner. I'm from the Center for New Music and Audio Technologies at the University of California, Berkeley. Last year, I got called up by the conductor, John Kennedy, who is the head conductor at Spoleto Festival, USA. He said, I've got a little Max project for you. Max is a program that we use at the Center for New Music and Audio Technologies for doing live electronic processing of sound. It's basically a program that can connect anything to anything. You can script all kinds of live, real-time interactions. And this little Max project that he was referring to was, in fact, quite involved, perhaps the most difficult project I have ever undertaken. This piece is complex in so many dimensions. I'm talking through a tiny window here. I'm very sorry. This piece is incredibly complex in every dimension. Its orchestration is incredibly difficult. Its electronic interactions are incredibly difficult. To give you some sense of this piece, it was first premiered at La Scala, and the two singers were suspended in a metal box in the middle of the Scala stage with everything else cleared away. So there was no room for a giant orchestra, but yet Luca really wanted a very big orchestra. So the solution was to have two orchestras, one that was in the pit and another live grand orchestra and chorus in the next building. That was performed live and piped into La Scala. All in real time, all coordinated in real time. Now, On subsequent productions, obviously, we cannot usually afford to have a live orchestra. So that element of the opera has been recorded and is coordinated with the live orchestra and singers via fairly complex system of click tracks and cues. There's a whole drama underlying this piece that hopefully you never see. But I feel like from the very moment I press the go button on this piece to the very last note, it's an incredibly tense period of time for me. It's a bit like lighting a fuse on a bunch of fireworks, and each one sets off the other until finally you get to the very end. It is stressful. But it works, and that when it works, it's really fantastic. Among the things that happens in this piece, we have live manipulation of the voices. We have live manipulation of the instruments in the orchestra, some of which are spatialized around the audience's head. Sometimes we in addition to the live playback of the orchestra piece, we have that can only be coordinated if the conductor is listening to a click track. So somebody has to make sure that click track hits exactly on, otherwise the whole thing falls apart. But it's it's an amazing piece in a way. A little bit about the background of the piece. It is an adaptation of an adaptation of Dangerous Liaison, the Leclos novel from the 18th century. 18th? Is it? I believe so. 18th. Yeah, he died in 1803, I think. It is so. In the Spoleto production, it was both. We are asked to imagine that this entire drama takes place both at the end of the world, and two ends of the world, in fact. One is the end of the French aristocracy right before the Revolution, and the other in a bunker at the end of World War III. And that so the Leclos novel has been reimagined through the lens of Heiner Müller, who is a German playwright, who takes the dramaturgy of the novel and adapts it to a shall we say grotesque, to the limits of grotesqueness, to the limits of depravity. And that is the basis from which Luca Francesconi writes this opera. It's an interesting interplay. We really only have two voices on stage, and each of them inhabits a multitude of personalities. And so, while we have just the two singers, the piece is called Quartet because there's at least a quartet worth of personalities inhabiting these two characters. So this is indicated in a number of ways. Within the music itself, the music, when these two characters are shifting personas, they might be executing figures that are very modernistic, and then in the next breath, as they transform into another persona, they take on a very classical sort of line. And an extension of that is the processing. Sometimes, as these two characters, Valmont and Mertoy, I can't ever say
I always have trouble with it. Mertoy. How do you say Plica? Because you played the part too.
Just do.
Yeah, forgive me. Yeah. But these two characters, in addition to switching personas, switch into and out of each other's persona. So there's this shift and back and forth between the shift of persona between the two. And how do you indicate that? Certainly you can do it musically, but one of the things that happens is the voices are affected. We have live processing and effects on the voices at certain moments. When, for example, Mertoy becomes Valmont and her voice drops by 2 octaves. Or when Valmont switches to a kind of like demon little girl, and the voice is affected, and it's a very convincing kind of. It just adds another layer to the interpretation. So yeah, that's
we have Heather Buck and Hadley Adams, who most of you probably know, doing these two parts, and yeah, with Elkanah Pulitzer directing, I think it should be really something spectacular.
Yeah. Oh, there's also dream sequences where it's an 80-minute opera, and as I said, it's like lighting a fuse and it goes off beginning to end. And so there's very little time for the singers to rest. And one of the clever ways of dealing with this is that there are these dream sequences that happen throughout the opera, where a singer will be singing and will stop singing, and an internal monologue will come through the house. The singer will stop singing, and so obviously we have to pre-record that, and that is all cued precisely. And it has an amazing effect because in addition to giving the singers some rest, it gives a sort of introspection to the piece, which is very nice.
As if they're singing, but their mouths are not.
Yeah,
moving.
or they're in a state of reflection or something. So, shall we hear?
Yeah, I'd love to hear some
I have one
examples.
question.
Yes.
So it's a French subject. Playwright is German, and the composer is Italian. And what language is the piece in?
The piece is written in English.
Yay! With titles, of course.
With titles. Except for parts of the chorus, which are in German also. So let's just hear the beginning of it.
The chorus and the large orchestra is recorded.
Well,
So you'll hear a great big sound, but it might not come from our band of live performers.
so I'm going to play just the beginning of the piece. This is, imagine we are all in a bunker, and perhaps the two persons on stage are perhaps the last two people in existence.
C'est réjouissant.
What are we hearing? Is this pre-recorded or is this
This is all pre-recorded.
pre-recorded? So this is not our group of musicians live playing yet.
It is an overture of sorts. Usually in the Spoleto production, this is a slow fade from black. We start in complete darkness. And soon little bits of the scenery begin to pop out. And we find the two characters on stage when the lights are finally fully up. I'm going to cut it off just there. In addition, there are parts of this that are cueing sound effects. And what is about to happen, we start hearing these scissor sounds throughout. And all of these are happening over the heads of the audience.
So you might hear this behind you.
Behind you, around you, maybe crossing over. And there are trajectories. Each sound file has a trajectory through the space, and this is all calculated in real time. So it requires a very fast computer and a lot of luck, because I'll be honest, this software loves to crash. So when we run this piece, we run it on two laptops at the same time. And if one of them starts to hiccup and have problems, we press a button and it switches over to the other one. And that takes a bit to coordinate, but it's absolutely necessary. Other things that happen in this piece, the orchestral moments that are coming from outside of the room, from this La Scala orchestra, it could just be static, but it has this quality of motion to it. So at some points, you can take the entire orchestra and throw it back across the audience, and then come back in this direction. And so we can do some very interesting things if we have the sound system up to the job. This piece does require a quite large sound system. When we did it at Spoleto, it required, I believe, 28 speakers, and that's 10 different channels. And that's 2 different surround arrays all around the audience. And so I'm going to play just a little excerpt from later in the piece. This is, I believe, this is happening right after there's a switch in persona where Martoy and Baumann have switched places, and I believe the Valmont says, I could get used to being a woman. And there's this great moment that happens with the orchestra, the outside orchestra. It's actually, there are many moments in the piece that are exactly that big and that heavy. So you go from having this very intimate set of forces where you have a very small, it's a large pit orchestra, but there can be very delicate moments, but then contrasted against these huge moments with an entire orchestra, the live orchestra, the singers, the chorus, everything all at once. And so it's a very dynamic piece. And
Awesome.
It's really beautiful and challenging, and I love that it's challenging, and I hope you all come see it.
Yeah. Are there? Do we have one or two questions for Jeremy? Yes, ma'am.
Is the outside orchestra the La Scala orchestra?
Yes.
Okay.
The Scala.
We've licensed the recording, and it wasn't cheap.
Yes.
But we licensed the recording for Jeremy to use.
Got it.
Yeah.
Is all this like the trajectory that you're talking about and these sound effects? Is that all notated in the score, or is it?
Yeah.
Is that something like
It's
a
pretty
lighting
precise.
scheme?
You didn't mention about IRCAM, which is where it was.
Yeah. So my first engagement with this piece was at IRCAM. I was studying at IRCAM in the summer of 2012. My advisor was Luca Francesconi during that time. I was having a piece done with the RGG String Quartet, and we spent 3 weeks rehearsing and then getting it performed.
IRCAM is the Center for Electronic Music in Paris.
Yes, if you can picture the Centre Pompidou Center is right next door. It is meant to be a reflection of it underground. So it is this. You don't. It's called Place Igor Stravinsky with the fountain right next door to the Centre Pompidou. Underneath that is a labyrinth of studios. It was a computer music center initially set up by Pierre Boulez, and they specialize in this type of thing, and in basically probing the very limits of what we can do with sound, with live electronics, and live performance, and interactivity. So yes, this is one of their exploits. This is one of their big projects, was working on this piece. Now the electronic part does not exist in published form. It is something that you kind of have to intern on, and so I interned with David Shepard, who was the original sound designer. He was sort of the second generation sound design on this piece. And if I go through the score, I'm going to try to find a good page, but everything is notated. Every time something happens, I have a line in my score, and so sometimes it's syllable by syllable of something happening with the singers. And that is turning effects on and off the voice, and all these things are sort of they're very. The orange means that there's a click track to the conductor, so you really have to hit that one. If the person in the pit doesn't get it, then I jump in and make sure it shows up. And then there's spatialization cues, things that cause the sounds to start moving around. It is very ambitious, and to their credit, West Edge has taken this on. It is an incredibly ambitious project. I don't know of a more complicated opera. From a technical standpoint, I don't know of a more ambitious opera. And this will probably be the most complicated opera ever staged in the Bay Area.
Has it been performed in other cities?
It has been. Its American premiere was at Stade Festival in Charleston, South Carolina last year. That was the Royal Opera production, which had just come from London under director John Full James.
It's had several productions in Europe.
Yes.
And there's about to be yet another one, I think, conducted by Barenboim, who's going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely, I mean, when people say, Mark, you're too ambitious, this is one of those. And in fact, as many of you might have guessed, there's no way we could never be able to do this without the incredible support of, you guessed it, Meyer Sound. And they're helping us a lot. They can't get us all the way. When Jeremy first did an estimate and put out for the rental equipment we needed, we came back with a price tag of about $60,000. And we all kind of and so we kept working. We went to Meyer. They're helping us with a lot of things. And I think, Jeremy, you said you got it down to about maybe 18.
If we're lucky.
If we're a
We
little
still have to
lucky.
pay tax, probably.
We're working with a budget of about $11,000, so it's getting closer. So if anyone wants to be a sponsor for the Electronics of Quartet, please see me. But we'll get there. We're sure we're going to get there, and I think it's going to be spectacular. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
I'm also very pleased to say that the production sponsors for Quartet are Heidi Munsinger and John Schott, who couldn't be here today. We're going to move on to Matahari, which... sorry? We're going to move on to Matahari, which is our second show we're producing. Matahari came out of... Do you need to get it quick?
I just want to turn this on.
Oh, that's a good idea. So every January, I go to New York. Why do I go to New York in January? There's lots and lots of small new opera happening in January in New York, and I often go to the Prototype Festival and have often gone with Bernice Lindstrom, who is a good friend and is often there also. This year I met Claudia, who is now on our board. Claudia, where are you? Last year, she's outside, but I met somebody who's from the Bay Area who joined our board, which is great. And mostly I get to interact with my friends and colleagues who are creating new opera, and many of them know that I put on operas, so I get taken out to lunch a lot, which is very nice. And one of the biggest things that happens there is called the Prototype Festival, and last year I actually worked on a piece that was presented at the Prototype Festival, which is very interesting to be a part of also. So the year before last, when I went, Bernice and I went to see this opera, Matahari, and I sort of didn't, I'd heard of Matahari. It was one of the pieces that was out there, and I said, let's go to that one. We always kind of pick and choose, hoping that we see the best ones. Often we will never get those 2 hours back, right? I mean, we've seen some doozies. And yeah, well, I'll tell you later, not in public. But Matahari was different, and we sat there, and John was with us. John passed away last year, and we miss him a lot. We were right in the front row, and it's a very small space, here, Art Center, and I just immediately got kind of wrapped into it, and I was so close that kind of helped, because at one point Matahari herself was as close as Bob and I are right now. And as it ended, I thought the ending was so spectacular, and it was so well conceived and interesting, and it also had an electronic music aspect, some amplification, not as much as Quartet, but a little bit, and it had forces that were perfect for us. A very small band, 7 singers, plus an actress playing Matahari, and I just really liked it. And I was so happy. I went, and I knew the producer, and I said, look, I really like this piece. It's really a West Edge piece. Can I meet the composer and librettist? She said, absolutely. Here they are. And we had lunch, and they were very happy. And Paul Pierce is the librettist, and he's also coming to direct it. It was his production, so it's great to have both the librettist and the director on site. Very sadly, Matt Marks, who was 38, died a few months ago. It was a real shock. I got a text one morning saying, did you see this on Facebook? And evidently he had a genetic disposition prone to heart attacks. And it just happened, and we had a couple of days of nobody knew what was going on, and so we're doing this production in loving memory of him. Jonathan actually interacted with him quite a lot more than I did, but it's been a really sad time for us, and we're really happy that we get to produce his opera, and I think his fiancée is coming to see it too. Yeah. So Molly Mahoney, who's here, I'm sitting there and I'm watching the part of the nun, and Molly is one of the nicest people I know, but this nun is not a nice person, though she softens at the end. Literally the first thing we see, there's a scrim, and you see this nun with the Sister Bertrille hat, and you see her being very severe, and then she lights a cigarette. So you know what this is going to be. And I don't know why I was sitting there thinking, God, I can imagine Molly in this part. I'm
grateful for it.
Yes. So I'm thrilled, and I'm very happy you're here to sing a little bit of the beginning, and you can get a sense of the music. Jonathan, of course, will play. This will be conducted by Emily Centuria, who's an old friend of Jonathan's and the company. We're really happy to present her for the first time, but she couldn't be here today, so Jonathan will play. And the role of Mata Hari is an actress-dancer, and this is Tina Mitchell, and she originated the part, and we've hired her also to come and do the part again. But since she's not here, you're going to have to imagine me as a sexy World War I spy, courtesan/spy. I'm sure you all can imagine. This is pretty much, there's a little bit of an ensemble at the beginning of the opera, but then this is pretty much how the opera starts, and then Molly will do another excerpt from later.
This is Mata Hari has just been escorted to the prison cell.
It's impossible. Impossible.
Prisoner 7214462 welcome to Salazar prison for women.
Impossible.
Cell 12, here you'll stay until your execution, unless clemency is given.
Sister,
Your bed and chair, the condemned don't need much.
Sister?
Listen to me, I'm not here to be your personal servant.
My personal...
Shut up, girl! The only allowances you'll receive are a 1 hour walk outside per day, cigarettes, and a little wine, which tastes like piss, by the way. This shitty war, even the simplest things, damn it. Consider yourself lucky. The other prisoners aren't allowed such luxuries.
What, sister?
The mystic dance
before Molly tells you where we are in the last scene, I wanted to say something about the structure of this opera. The opera is for 2 women and I guess about 8 different male personalities played by 5 or 6 men, and it tells the story of her life. It is nonfiction in that sense. It really is a telling of her life story from an imagined point of view of Mata Hari in her prison cell, but it relies on the actual facts. And so the dancer, by the way, the actress dancer says lines in absolute perfect musical rhythm. It's all, a lot of it is notated to be exactly. Some of it's not, like what we just did is free, but she is an active musician as part of the troupe, and we're lucky to have Tina Mitchell because she does it expertly, very, very accurately, and it's all will be coordinated. And the instruments are also, there are only 4 people in the orchestra, but they're amplified and things are done with their sound, and there's a bit of synthesizer music as well. So it's
An electric guitar.
right, electric guitar, and so it's got a very interesting modern and old-fashioned sound mixed up together, which you don't get a sense of on the piano reduction, of course. But in the course of the opera, you see various scenes of Mata Hari's life and her interaction with these men, practically all of whom give her a very hard time. Yeah. Ending up, of course, with condemning her for what she probably did not do. So, you want to say where we are in this last scene?
Oh, of course, sure. So as you saw in the very beginning, Sister Leonide and Mata Hari don't get along so well, and she's pretty callous towards her, but as they get to know each other over I think it's 5 or 8 months, she's in the prison, and Sister Leonide, the sisters actually live in the prison cells, so she was in some neighboring cell with Mata Hari. They talk and get to know each other. She softens, and at the very end of the piece, this is in the last scene of the opera, as Mata Hari has been woken up and is being led to her execution, she is given a moment to write some letters, and she wrote 3 letters. I don't believe any of them were ever recovered or sent, for that matter, but the librettist imagines that one of the letters she might have written would be to her daughter, Non.
Please believe me. Please do not believe what the newspapers say. I am sorry for abandoning you. I couldn't stay with your father. I tried to keep you in my life. I tried. I'm sorry for everything. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. For little Norman too. Little Norman too. I don't even know if this letter will even get to you. will laugh at them all. Non. Laugh at those who placed me against the wall. I will laugh with a profound smile of contempt.
Thank you, Molly.
You're welcome.
Can't wait to see you when
Yeah.
the nuns happen.
You're right.
I want to say a word about the composer, Matt Marks. I interacted with him a little bit, and he was a very wonderful combination of being open and friendly and energetic and not at all possessive or pedantic about what he wrote down. But what he wrote down was extremely specific, and it was very responsive to the text and to the structure that he worked out together with Paul Pierce. And it really gave me an impression of somebody who had a very open future, because he had a great talent at putting different elements together in operatic form and to bringing people together.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to, next we're going to welcome my friend Phillip Skinner, who has been with us for,
One quick comment.
did you have a, yeah, John?
Mark directed an excellent Tosca in Sacramento Opera a couple months ago.
Oh,
And believe it or
John.
not, he sang Tosca in the dress.
I told you not to tell that story. Phil, come on in, Phil. So, the story is, John got to see it. All right, so Philip has done 7 shows in a row with us, 7 seasons, which is incredible, and it's because I love him and we treasure him. And so I recently, John and Lois Crow are fans of West Edge Opera. Liv and Davis and are big fans of the Sacramento Philharmonic, and the Sacramento Philharmonic invited me to direct a semi-stage Tosca last month. And they said to me, oh, and Phil Skinner's Angelotti. And I said, I'm sorry, I heard you wrong. Phil Skinner is not Angelotti. He's like one of the best Scarpias I've ever seen. And they said, oh. And then a week later, I got a phone. So Phil Skinner is Scarpia. So we did, this is just a little story. Thank you, John, which I will tell. We did the entire opera in 3 sessions with, I have to say, a lot of detail. It helped that it was 3 people who knew the roles really well. When we got on stage for the first rehearsal, Alexandra Luciton, did I say her name right?
Better than I would have.
Lucian? I'm sorry. She tested the fall and hurt her head. Very important to test the fall in Tosca. And so she had to go get some stitches, and guess who got to do Tosca? So Phil basically sort of, so that's what. And I was like, thank God no one's here to see this. And who do I see as I'm leaving the stage but Mr. Crow? And I said, oh, I know he's going to be telling somebody this story. I didn't know it would be all of you. So I want to pass this on to Jonathan, who will be conducting Pelléas this summer. And he and Phil have an excerpt. Phil will be Arkell, the grandpa, the king. And after there's some singing, Jonathan and Flicka will have a little conversation about her experiences doing this opera. So, thank you.
Okay.
Jonathan.
All right. So this is the second scene of the 4th act. Although in our production, it's going to be the last scene of our 2nd act. We're changing the format a little bit because we didn't want it to be too long. The opera's written in 5 acts, it's a little too long to condense to 2 acts, and I thought, well, we'll cut this down to our usual 2.5 hours. If we can do The Ring in 3.5 hours, we can do Quartet in 2 hours easy. But it turns out you can't, because the piece is, although you don't think of it when you're listening, that everything is really totally important, you just can't splice in and out of it. It really goes the way it goes. So our production will be in 3 acts and just under 3 hours. But this scene is the scene in which the old man, the grandfather, comes to life and has a say to Melisande about what he's sad that she has not been happy. He's noticed that she's not been happy in the castle. He's practically totally blind, but he is aware of what's going on, and he philosophizes all the time in the opera, generally gets things morally correct and practically completely wrong. And in this case, it seems to me that he wants to be tender with her, and he wants to actually share some physical affection with her. That's something that she's not really interested in, but in a way, he doesn't realize that he's kind of sweet-talking her, and he's trying to speak philosophically at the same time. And this is the edge of I think the whole opera rests on, we're trying to explore in our production. How to get the physicality and the underlying currents of the characters out there for everybody to see without abandoning the kind of tasteful quality and certainly the symbolic atmospheric quality of the opera. And Philip and I haven't worked together until we just went over this a little earlier today, and I thought, well, what is this going to be like? And it turns out that his approach is exactly the same as what mine would be for all the characters, including his. All right.
À mon âge
A very intimate rendition.
Thank you. That was gorgeous.
What else have you got to say?
Yeah. Terrific. Okay. So I have a couple of stools here that we'll bring over. Thank you. That was such a treat.
Je n'ai pas peur de vos lèvres. So beautiful. Oh, gorgeous.
A little what? Forward. Okay, good. All right.
What's it here?
All right. These are adjustable if you want them.
Can we swing around?
You can swing around. Do whatever. I thought it'd be nice to get you a little higher. People in the back. Good. Thanks so much. That was so sweet.
Oh, my pleasure. Hi, everybody. I just would like to start with saying I hadn't been to West Edge and from its birth, but went last year with my dear, dear friend, and I just could not believe it. I cannot believe what you have achieved and what you have done, and I had the feeling from the public as well that it belongs to you, and these amazing operas that you found. So I thank you all for what you've helped create, this
It's really a
magnificent
family.
situation.
We
You
really-
and Jonathan, here in East
Bay.
East Bay.
So, the first time you sang the role of Melisande, when was that? I mean, you don't have to say what year, but where were you in your career and sort of what the circumstances were? Was it a role you had been wanting to do, or did it come as a surprise? Did you tell us about it?
Well, I had never heard of Pelléas and Mélisande. I didn't know that Debussy wrote an opera, and it was thanks to my manager at the time that he said, you should try this. Now, what girl in the world doesn't want to have hair, blonde hair, down to the ground?
From a tower.
From a tower. I ask you. So I said yes and did it the first time in Santa Fe in like 1974, 75. And I remember it so well because all the decor was a lot of the trees from around Santa Fe. The aspen trees that make this incredible fluttery sound. And it was an exquisite production. But one funny thing I'll tell you is there's a scene where Pelléas and Mélisande go down into a grotto. And to create this, they gave Pelléas and Mélisande a sort of a fluttery silk, large piece of material. And as we walked through, there was going to be air blowing up to keep it aloft. And they also wanted a little effect of smoke. But they didn't want the smoke machine. They wanted real people smoking. And this was, the early 70s was the big marijuana time. So all the stagehands were blowing marijuana. And so it was Richard Stilwell, we got off the stage and we thought, damn, we were terrific. So that was the first time, and I just
and after
loved
that,
it.
and after that, did you get to do it often? Or?
I did. It is an opera that isn't done that much, but it is an opera that, and I was saying that every great conductor is in love with. They all want to perform it, and I was able to perform it with Karajan and Abado. They just with Seiji. It's hypnotic, this piece, and you find yourself getting into the world of Debussy and not trying to explain it all the time, just going with the amazing words and the poetic way that everyone speaks, especially Pelléas. Some of Pelléas's music is the most exquisite in the world. Mélisande spends more time saying, I'm happy. No, I'm not happy. I'm happy. I might be happy. No, I'm not happy. She is sort of the catalyst for all these characters around her that want a piece of her, and there's sometimes not there. You don't know where she is even. She may not even be there.
Were there times when you felt that you did make up your mind, this is who I think Mélisande really is and what she wants, or did that vary from production to production?
Well, in one production I remember thinking she really is a conniving little so-and-so, and she's weaving her way through people's lives.
That worked for that production.
And we had a production where, essential to the production is a tower. Mélisande throws her wedding ring in the air and it falls in the water, a well. And we didn't have a tower or a well.
We have both.
Yes. And, but it was amazing. It worked. It's just it's a fascinating piece, and
so
I've done it maybe eight or 9 different productions.
So if a director wasn't saying this is our mise en scène, you should play, how would you inhabit the character? What kind of person would you want to be true to how you just how you feel about when you're singing the role.
Well, you know, I think a lot of the work of all the characters in this piece is done by Debussy and the libretto.
Mhm.
That it's you hear Pélias's enthusiasm when he comes back in the first time. He's just sort of the personification of youthful enthusiasm that doesn't understand that anything bad can happen to him. Mélisande we don't know. The big question is, where was she before? And there are all sorts of theories that she was one of the wives of Barbe Bleue, and she was tortured, and she's very damaged. And that effect, I think that is very much part of her character. She's someone who has been extremely wounded, and like people who have been hurt in a horrific way, they don't tell the truth because they've learned how to say what needs to be said, whether it's true or not.
To defend themselves.
To defend themselves, to protect themselves, to survive. And she is a survivor, and she, I think, falls deeply in love with Pélias. He's just like nothing. The light of her.
So at the end of the opera, did you ever have the feeling that you were dying for a particular reason? I mean, the character Mélisande was designed for a particular reason. Did that change, or
she dies at the end?
Oh, sorry to give it away.
It takes quite a long time. And I remember rehearsing it we did it with Claudio in Milan, and we were rehearsing someplace outside of Milan, and when that scene came, Mélisande only has a few little interjections, and everybody's singing around her, and we'd gone out for a big Italian lunch, and it was my little chance to sort of nod off, in this dramatic scene. I think in her life, Pélias is complete and utter sun, and she's lived in darkness. But you might not agree, Jonathan.
We haven't started working on it. As a conductor, it's very interesting. You can tell me about the conductors you worked with, what their attitude was. As a conductor, I tend to make up my own mind how everything makes sense. And I say, well, this character works well if this character has this motivation and so on. And then I get to the staging rehearsals, I work with somebody like Mark, and everything shifts because another perspective comes in, another way of making the piece coherent comes in, and sometimes we have spirited discussions about what makes more sense. Or somebody has an idea which the other person says that doesn't make sense, or it doesn't make sense to my way of looking at it. And that's the joy of working in a company where people know each other and they're together a lot more than in big companies where somebody comes in and then is going to be gone and never see them again. We establish a relationship with the people who work with us and with each other, and we can nurture the art, nurture the work of art. And so I don't know exactly. I have some ideas about who she is, but tell me when you work with this is a particularly interesting role to work with a conductor because it is so gentle. The characterization, it's specific and yet understated. All the music is that way, and therefore the characterization, the indications for characterizations are going to be understood. What was it like singing the role with these different conductors with strong ideas?
It's unusual in that you think there are big differences between doing Mozart with Scholti or with Karajan, and in Mozart I'd say there were. In this piece there weren't. What was constant was the fascination, devotion, and complete seduction of the piece for these great for great conductors. Yep. It's so there's so many colors in the orchestra, and so many different elements. At one point when we recorded it, Karajan, there's a scene, a word that Pélias says. He says, "On a brisé le glace avec des fers rougis." We broke the glass with hot iron. And the orchestra plays what are they called?
Harmonics.
Flageolet. And it's like, it's at the height. and it's meant to sound like breaking glass. And he kept going over it and over it and over it and over it, and all the technical staff in the recording studio were having fits because this was thousands of dollars. But that's how much it meant to him to get that sound right, to have it have its effect.
Speaking of sound, this opera, although it's soft, generally the orchestra is substantial,
Yeah,
and you
it's
play a
big.
role where you sing not very high in the range.
Right.
Even for mezzo soprano, sometimes it's sung by soprano, where it's really
Yeah.
kind of mid-low range. What was it like dealing with the question of singing over the orchestra or into the sound of the opera house of the different places you've sung?
When Mélisande sings, it comes way back.
Mm-hmm.
It just does.
Right.
So it wasn't, I was so in love with the process of doing it that I didn't care if I was hurt or not. I was having a great time. It just became sort of, you are aware of that in other things when the orchestra is really loud, but not in this piece for some reason.
Did working on this piece affect the way you sang other French music particularly, or other roles of this sort in general?
Well, probably in a way of singing through lines and making the diction extremely clear, because it's so much a part of the piece. And I have found in my years of living in France from time to time that the French really love their language, and rightly so. It's an exquisite language, and sounds can be expressed in French very clearly. It's just sounds of, I think of a Debussy song of the pebbles, and you kind of hear the pebbles in the music. But that's that reverence for French, And one time when we did it, an air of Debussy came to all the performances, and she wasn't going to allow certain things to be done, and there was a big to-do about that, but somehow she behaved herself. Yeah.
So what advice would you give to a young singer taking on this role? We have your protege, or I don't know whether you taught her. Kendra Broom, she's very, very talented.
The young lady who is going to sing it, I met when she was 15. I have worked for years with a group called, it's now YMCO, it used to be YMP. And I would drop Kendra home after rehearsals, and she lived in San Leandro, and at some point her mom moved away and left her in a house with two or three other couples, adults, and I felt that was wrong, that she's 16, she's gorgeous. And so I asked a friend of mine who lives in Alameda, could she possibly live with you? And she did. She lived with one of my best friends in Alameda, Jackie Cloran, in a tiny little house. And right from the first moment I ever heard her sing, I thought, there's something unbelievably magic there. She used to be very, very serious. She's a little bit less serious now, but very intense, great sense of humor. And I saw her, I was just in Philadelphia, and she had done scenes from Pelléas. She's at Curtis right now on scholarship. And I mean, she's phenomenal. And I'm just so incredibly proud of her. She went on complete scholarship to Manhattan School of Music, and then they love her so much in Philadelphia that she's down there. And she said, when I saw her, I was a little worried, because she said, I really love, what I love the most is I love the kind of YMCO work. I love the outreach. I'm very passionate about it, and I've kind of thinking of taking this job, and I thought, oh, no, you have to sing. You have to sing, Kendra. And I kept saying, you can do both. You can do this, and you can sing and do performances and still do outreach. There's plenty of space for all of it for you. And I'm so grateful that you
Oh,
both
it's
loved
a
her
pleasure.
and
Yeah.
that Mark loved her. And
I mean, she came up and we had a photo shoot in New York, and I was just totally entranced by
Yeah.
her. I mean, she's just a wonderful personality, and she's clearly, my friends at Curtis, everyone's talking about that she's the one, you know.
yeah,
And I'm kind of happy to report that she called me and she said, Bart is asking if I can come. Would it fit? And I said, I'm sorry, no. She's like, that's fine. I'll tell him no. I'm like, oh, like Bart is calling her up and
yeah.
and
Well, yeah,
inviting her. So it's
she's
like,
about to take off.
I think
and-
so.
Yeah.
We're very
And
happy to have
It's a really glorious sound. She goes high with no problem. She goes low with no problem. Like you, Molly. I mean that incredible high facility and it's a very engaging quality in her voice and her person. You know.
Yeah.
So I'm just
So-
so
so-
excited.
You know, when I met her, I didn't tell you this. I met her and she said, so I've looked to see who else you hire, what other singers you hire. Are you sure you want me to do this? I feel like I'm playing with the grown-ups. We're sure. We're absolutely sure.
That's so neat.
Yeah.
All right, but speaking of this, the question for a young singer coming into the adult community, as it were, do you think somebody of that age should they be getting advice from other people? Would you give her advice, or would you just let her totally explore it on her own?
She's the type of singer, the type of character that she'll find her own way, and it'll be better than anything. You know, when you were talking about directors asking you to do something that you just don't believe in, I've had that many times in, you know, sometimes super modern productions that just really you're going to have this squeaky thing going on during an aria, and but by going there with them,
Mm-hmm.
fitting it on and making it work, even though you hate it,
Mm-hmm.
you learn something. So I don't, you know, discourage kids from. I mean, I did have one situation. I was in Glyndebourne, this festival in England, and Sir Peter Hall was directing The Marriage of Figaro, and he wanted to have Cherubino be naked from the back, you know, in the dressing scene. There's a little dressing scene where Susanna and the Countess dress up Cherubino. And in that same season, they were doing Ulysses. And L'Umanità Fragilità, the character, he talked this one young artist into appearing nude because she was human frailty. And everyone said, well, how he did it was he walked her around the lake at Glyndebourne, and he came to me and I said, Peter, you're going to have to walk me around Lake Michigan to get I ain't doing it. I just ain't doing it. You know, but it was funny. It was kind of a lark for him. So, but, you know, I have had situations where I've been asked to do something that I just don't believe in or don't think is the character. And by going there, I found something else, you know.
In this role, some roles, it's clear you can express something about yourself outward because the character is very outwardly expressive. Melisande is a little bit enigmatic. But did you get the feeling when you sang the role that you could still get inside and get yourself out into?
Yes.
Into
And
what parts of you did it engage? This
is a really good point. You know, it goes back to the first experience with the marijuana scene. That there are nights when you think, this is it. This is what I really am going for. This is what I want. I'm there. And the director, and then you do it the next night, and you're kind of across your mind is going this horrible thought like, I think I'm going to have a ham sandwich when I go home, and maybe a vodka tonic, you know. And you're not thinking about anything. You're not in it. You're a million miles away, and the director will come back and say the second night was better. And it's because I think all of what we do is based on those real feelings, but our job is to give them to you. And if we're keeping them for ourselves, they're not traveling. So that's why 1,000,000 hours of rehearsal is you do it till you're not even thinking about it. And then you might find ways, but it's for you. Besides which, what baritone tenor could sing Pelléas as hard as it is and be going through anything? It's such a difficult high part with 5,000 words, or maybe 10,000 words. No, I felt like Mélisande when I did it. I was very disappointed to take off my wig. It's a dream. It was a dream, and I loved every character that was in it. I even loved Golo, and there's a big scene where Golo has just had enough of her, and he's whipping her around by her hair, or close to it. It's quite violent, and I've done it with a couple of Golos who I've thought my eyes would get a little wide. I think no, don't go that far. But it's really, incredible.
So you say when she does have to lie now and then.
Yeah.
There are not a whole lot of operatic characters, women characters who lie with the sort of the natural quality that Mélisande has.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a funny feeling because you had to tell Golo I dropped it in the grotto and
Yes.
you didn't drop it in the grotto of the ring?
No, and I have found in the last 5 years in the work I've done with a lot of kids who come from amazingly difficult families with nothing to hold on to, really, and have been homeless and all that, I do find that certain lies are part of their world. And so that kind of, I think, makes a connection with Mélisande. That's part of her fragility, is she doesn't know. She really doesn't know. But the ring is, she throws a ring up and higher and higher, and making Pelléas very nervous, and of course it goes in the well.
Did you ever drop it at the wrong time?
Oh, all the time. It would go.
Before the time came when it's supposed
or we
to.
didn't have one.
Oh, I see. That's
We practiced with one to make it accurate with the weight, but we didn't have one. Because then you'd be going, oh my God, here we go, I got it, Steph Curry.
We're really happy to have directors for this piece is Khuner Stickon, who you actually know better than we do because Khuner's worked on the Leonard Folia operas. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
She's just unbelievable girl. She assisted, I know her as an assistant, but she has this mind that never stops, and she also she's trained in ballet. She did choreography for this opera that we were doing in Houston, and she's just incredibly intellectual, incredibly well read, incredibly funny, but very, very passionate woman. Very passionate,
Yeah. Asking her to do it was yet another of my, I think you're too fancy to work for my opera company, but I'm going to ask anyway, because I had followed her career and I didn't know her very well, but I reached out, and we had a lot of friends in common, and she was, very flattered by that, but then she came back and she said, I've actually pitched it to a couple of companies, because I've been wanting to do this opera for a very long time, know it very well, and I want to do it very badly, and the fact that you're asking me to do it, I will say yes. And I was
it's going to be just so divine. It really is,
And the hair is going to be, it's going to be a big part of the show. There's a lot, I think a wig that has about 7 different incarnations. It changes from very, very long to, so we'll see.
Good.
Gosh, Flicka, thank you so much
my
for
pleasure.
this. Gosh, it's so
I can't wait.
wonderful.
Very, very very much.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. We so appreciate it. We're going to have some desserts for you outside, and thank you again for supporting us. Yay!
Thank you.